And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me is a returning good brother to the temple, previously on here for Shen Battler Aurora, which should be out on Drive-Thru RPG by now, I think. And soon to be coming back with Mecha vs. Kaiju's 2020X edition. Or I think that's how you'd say it, 202X or something. The one and only Mr. Wright, Johnathan Wright.
Thank you for that intro. Yeah, you are correct. It's Mecha vs. Kaiju 2020X, which is a play on the dating system you'll see in a lot of anime, like specifically Akira, which is like said 1990X. So it's not specific, and also just kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. And Of course, there's been... Obviously, the Mega Man series has used that a lot in both Mega Man and Mega Man X. So you've got that. Then you've got some anime that just make up their own calendar, looking at you, Gundam.
Oh yeah, that's a classic, but also inspired by the way that human beings make calendars, right? When we eventually, get into space, somebody is going to reset the calendar for the year mankind actually settles off planet. So yeah. I mean that's a pretty natural line of demarcation there.
And Japan soft resets their calendar whenever there's a new emperor.
Something hardwired both into the Godzilla series and into the lore of Mecha vs. Kaiju. Since MBK takes the idea that every giant monster movie really happened, Japan sets its sort of eras based on the imperial calendar as well. And it's coincidental, but really dramatically appropriate that the Showa era ends and the Heisei era begins just as a new cycle of Godzilla movies begin. So like Godzilla 1984 gets released here as Godzilla 1985, and
no, it was called 84 when it was brought stateside. It was in Japan. It was called The Return of Godzilla.
The Return. That's right. Yeah. So and at that same time, you have a new imperial calendar starting. So you've got this whole cycle of new movies coming out at the same time, and so the movies use that as their lines of demarcation, and then 2000 becomes the Millennium Era. The successful American series becomes the Legendary Era, and the history of the Mecha vs. Kaiju world mirrors that as well. With a kind of a drought of kaiju from the mid 70s into the mid 80s. And then a huge resurgence of them coming back much more powerful in the 80s and 90s, leading to a new generation of mecha that have to be created. So I think I told you last time I'm a history teacher as well as English. So the whole lore of Mecha vs. Kaiju is treated as a massive alt history story, where the world progresses, with the exception of some mythological elements that happened in prehistory. The world happens as it happened up until 1945. And at that point, everything changes. I've been listening to a lot of history podcasts about empire and seeing the effects of colonization and decolonization. And one of the things that really fascinated me when I was creating this world was the effects of giant monsters on the world. With Europe pulling out of all of its colonies in the 1950s, what kind of effect does that have? And me being just an out and out lefty liberal, I see it as a pretty good thing for most of the places that used to be colonies. So so that I get to write that into my history as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find kind of interesting looking into both that and just the history of how the kaiju and mecha genres have evolved over the years is there are certain beliefs that have been called into question over the years. Certain narratives. I think one of the big ones is that somehow nothing happened between the years of Mazinger Z and Mobile Suit Gundam. It was nothing but a bunch of toy commercials until Gundam came along and gave more complex storytelling, which is a narrative I still see to this day, but it's one that doesn't match reality.
Yeah. No, agreed.
Have you ever heard of the Gekiga movement?
I've not.
In the early days of manga, the main thing that was the dominant subgenre was gag comics, essentially. A lot of stuff that would be four comas or the equivalent of like comic strips in a newspaper. That
funny. I had a friend's a parent who called he was a comic collector, but she called them funny books.
Yeah.
So so stuff that just like cartoons on the page, exactly.
And the Gekiga movement was an attempt to try and get away from that. And a lot of people who are considered the godfathers of manga were involved with that movement, including Go Nagai. This was a movement that started, I want to say, the late 60s, early 70s, to kind of shift away from that, especially since by the early to mid 70s, anime was in a tough spot. Mostly because, well, for one, there was a lot of really ugly-looking animation, but also the fact that Tokusatsu was eating its lunch. I mean, Kamen Rider and Super Sentai had come out around that time, and Ultraman was also making a comeback.
Wildly creative stuff, just totally off the wall, and yeah, just like bleeding creativity. You couldn't watch an episode without just seeing 10 insane ideas.
Some more insane than others. Looking at you, half of the monsters from Kamen Rider X. Like everybody thinks, well, it was the Showa era. Of course somebody was on something. I'm not sure if you've seen Kamen Rider X, but it started out with normal animal-themed monsters, which is a very Ishinomori thing, but then, as we get further on, we have this mix of monsters and historical figures, which is where we get things like Ant Capone, Spider Napoleon, and the creme de la creme, Starfish Hitler.
Japan and their fascination with Nazi Germany. It's something, all right. Yeah, but I mean, even if you like don't look at, even if you completely rewrote the scripts, the monster designs are just completely insane. I mean, like rainbow anteaters and stuff inspired by Shinto gods and stuff. I mean, it's just like it's completely bonkers and incredibly creative.
Yeah, and Anguillus is there too, mostly getting his ass kicked, but he's there too.
And the original jobber of the kaijus, right? Like the first. The second kaiju, the first new kaiju, in Toho's thing, and just gets completely pwned his first time out and every time out subsequent. You know, he's just
The only time he seemed like a legitimate threat was Final Wars.
Like when you get a little computer animation to actually make him move well, I mean he's gonna be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta admit, I do have a real soft spot in my heart for him, and I feel like I did right by him in Mecha versus Kaiju. He's actually written as almost godlike, like a lord of the underworld, you know, that sort of thing. Because it was just. It wasn't that I felt sorry for him. It's that I really am kind of fond of him, and
it's building around that whole armadillo concept, which, and there is that myth that armadillos can do that full roll into a sphere. They can curl up, but they don't roll, and there's only one species of them that actually does form a full ball.
And it's completely adorable when they do it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, absolutely. But no, so I called him Rapagon, the king under the earth.
Yeah.
And one of his all of the kaiju have their own sort of like hooks. Mm-hmm. They're called aspects. But one of his is chip on its shoulder, because he is always getting jobbed so bad. I just figure he has got to resent it. So
like a little brother complex.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, and I mean, like, what? How does he get treated in the movies? And
he gets the Worf principle.
Absolutely. How do you prove that a kaiju is tough? Well, let him beat this guy, and he'll look cool. Oh, and he's Godzilla's best friend. Oh, what does he do? He sends him off as his errand boy, right? I mean, it's just he definitely feels like he is kind of resentful by this point. And I imagine his showing in Final Wars was at least for some of the writers, maybe their way of showing him some respect.
Final Wars was them having fun in multiple ways. That and the fact that I cannot understate how much of a grudge Toho held regarding Emmerich Godzilla. Like that.
Well, them and the fans.
Yeah, but the reason I point that out is on at least 3 different occasions in subsequent movies, they took direct pot shots at Godzilla. Like they weren't even trying to hide it.
I think you're referring to that tuna-eating loser. That's.
I mean, there was the remark of using the term Gojira and not Godzilla with that whole. Well, they call it Godzilla over there, but not in Japan. Which, geez, people say I'm petty. Then again, given the way that story unfolded, I can understand why they would hold a grudge. But at the same time, sometimes you end up with sometimes looking into these things, you find very weird parallels. Like I was being able to do a 6 Degrees of Bacon with Steve Martin and Godzilla.
Nice.
Which I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. Steve Martin was the dentist in Little Shop of Horrors. Little Shop of Horrors was one of the big inspirations for the design of Biollante.
One of my personal favorite kaiju.
Steve Martin was also the name of Raymond Burr's character in King of the Monsters.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Mm-hmm. The man who took the job because he was he was getting typecast around that time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's weird how these things kind of go full circle. And when Godzilla 84 came around, they decided to go out of their way to not mention Steve Martin's name, because even though they probably would have won any suit, it would have been a really bad look to have somebody named Steve Martin and it's not that one, when the comedian was already making waves at that point.
You know, and you know, one thing I give Raymond Burr is one of my favorite actors for a lot of reasons. You know, and Godzilla is just one of them. But Godzilla 84, you know, one of the reasons why I really appreciate him is that he never talked down about being in a monster movie. He was proud of the work he did and would always, you know, anytime asked about it, always go out of his way to say not only did he like his movie, but he liked the other movies. Yeah. And, you know, so I mean, it was never an embarrassment for him. And, you know, you got to give a guy who is in a position like that a lot of credit.
I find it an interesting contrast, and even though I have taken my pot shots at that 1984 Americanization, but it's largely it's not. But whenever I do that, I always take Raymond Burr and I put him in a bubble over in the corner. So any slander I have for the movie does not affect him because he's in his bubble. It mostly has to do with who pushed for that Americanization. That was New World Pictures. New World Pictures was the product of Roger Corman. Corman is a debated figure because while he did give a lot of people their first big break in filmmaking, he's also one of the most embarrassing cheapskates that there ever has been in filmmaking.
I gotta take the other side of that, and I respect your opinion, and I totally understand where it's coming from. But I mean, this is a man whose autobiography was written, "How I Made 10,000 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime." I mean, this is a man who was unashamed about his cheapskateness and the fact that, you know, he and a lot of other movie makers at the time were really filling a niche, right? I mean, they were the VHS, schlock movies of, like, you know, the 1950s. Right, I mean, like, you know, people were hungry for for that kind of content, and
especially in the 80s when there was this explosion of VHS, which is why rental stores started to become a thing.
Absolutely, and I mean, like, this huge backlog of movies that they had produced, and then could, you know, all of a sudden market again. Now, you know, the way they made them, is, like, you know, sort of borderline unethical, and certainly things like residuals and, like, you know, and resales for, like, to television, to VHS, to home media and stuff like that. Yeah. They certainly didn't. They were not generous by any stretch of the imagination to the people that actually made the movies. So I mean, yeah, you can say what you want about Corman as a businessman and a lot of those other guys, but damn, did they make some amazing movies.
And in all fairness, when I say slander, it's not like I'm being malicious. It's more of one of the maxims here in the temple is we hold these truths to be self-evident that all are cremated equal.
You burn them all the same way, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, like you say, the Americanization of Godzilla 84 is just, I mean, there are so many laughable parts of it, right? I mean, Dr. Pepper alone is worth, like, 100 memes. Yeah. Because, I mean, it's just, and we saw it I saw it in the theater with some friends of mine. So I was like all of, like, what have I been in 15? And I'm, like, sitting there in the theater so excited because, like, I grew up watching Godzilla on a 12-inch screen, and that wasn't even in color until I was in middle school. So, like, that was my experience. And then to see Godzilla on the big screen finally, was incredibly exhilarating. But even an incredible otaku like me, and in the day, when when those two soldiers are walking down the hallway, and there's just right in the middle of the screen is a Dr. Pepper machine, I'm like, you have got to be kidding me.
Yeah, I remember when Chuck Sonnenberg talked about it, he said it was appropriate because Dr. Pepper is as harmful to flesh as the oxygen destroyer.
I say as I laugh with my 32 ouncer of Dr. Pepper in my hand, right? No, and yeah, it was that, and obviously, that goes in with with that whole idea of we got to make some money on this, right? So I mean, the whole marketing campaign and all that stuff. Yeah, it's
the sole reason it was done was because Dr. Pepper had worked with Toho on a anniversary series of commercials, and that was what put the idea in their head of let's have Dr. Pepper pay for this movie.
And you know what? If that's what it took to get 15-year-old me to see Godzilla on the big screen, that's a price I'm willing to pay.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about the fifth engine the last couple times, but the last time I had you on, I didn't have an opportunity to really be hands-on with certain aspects. And one of them I wanted to kind of delve into is the archetypes. Now,
yes,
going into what each archetype has would be a little bit redundant for this. So instead, I'd like to play a little word association. Consider this the geekiest form of the Rorschach test you'll ever take.
Nice. Before we go, can we take a moment just to talk a little bit about what the archetypes are? As kind of a grouping. The fifth engine, at its spine, is built on 5th edition. Mechanically, we swapped out static bonuses for dice so that instead of adding +2, +1, +3, you add D6, D4, D8, and you roll them all in a dice pool. Add the two highest together, that gets your action total. The number of dice that roll 4 or higher is your impact. That's how much effect you have on the scene. And that's the mechanics in a nutshell. Just that core idea, that's how they function. Archetypes are essentially the replacement for classes, but they are a lot more personal because they are a personality type. And you get a description of the archetype, you get a guiding value, which is kind of the most important sort of emotional core of that character. There's some suggested affinities, which are groups and sets of skills that they're good at, and then they all have a talent, and that talent gives you a special ability that basically lets you do whatever it is that archetype is good at. That's kind of the mechanical core of the archetype, and you always start with your archetype when you're creating a character, and you build out from there.
So, with that in mind, I would like to play a little bit of character association.
Okay.
So, I'm going to list off the archetypes, and with each one, I want you to tell me the first character in whether in anime, in tokusatsu, and so on, that comes to mind. Doesn't have to be limited to just kaiju adjacent affairs. Everything's on the table. Got it?
Sounds good.
All right. So first one is the Danmar.
The Danmar is was originally envisioned as the creepy girl. We changed it to the creepy or quiet one. Here I'm always associating this with with sort of like the character in the background that has kind of the sleepy eyes. They're always sort of like half open. They always have a look on their eyes that is that's very quiet and relaxed, and they're not necessarily they're awake, but they're not really connected with you, because basically they are kind of withdrawn, and that's the real setup for that character. I don't know. As far as characters, there's Shikamaru from Naruto would maybe be a good choice for that. In the background, always watching. The thing with the Danmari is that their talent is it's always the quiet ones. Mm-hmm. So once per session, you can basically make a statement about how you see things, and it becomes a bonus that anybody can use, as long as they agree with you. So it's like, it's a person, they're in the background, quiet, watching everything, and then suddenly they say, he limps on the left. I'll bet he's weak on the left side. And then all of a sudden, everybody can see it, and then they're all hitting him from the left. So it's that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can get that. So the Genki girl / Keith.
So the Genki girl is it might be better looking at it from the Keat side, because the Keat is short for parakeet. Mm-hmm. So it's just like somebody who won't shut up. Their talent is motor mouth. As long as they are talking, they're able to do better. They get a bonus for being is completely loud and talking and never stopping, and for that there's so many. It was more the image of the person that was just continually talking, and their arms are waving around so fast that they look like a windmill. You're seeing them you got six arms are showing at the same time in the same frame, because they're moving faster than the camera is moving. That's kind of what that was kind of the inspiration for Genki Girl, and she shows up so often that I just knew that I had to include. I knew I had to include that guy, that one.
Mm-hmm. All right, the Honcho.
So the Honcho is, as the name suggests, it's actually that name was actually ported over from English. Head honcho, that sort of thing. That's always the big guy in anime. I always think of Lunk from the Robotech series. There's any of these guys that are coming in that are just bigger than you and more outgoing than you, stuff that is going to be loud and boisterous, and yet at the same time, sometimes not the kind of guy that is the kind of guy that people get close to. And that's kind of, I always tried with creating these archetypes, having kind of a balance to it. Yes, there's a good side, but there's also kind of a downside from a role-playing point of view.
Mm-hmm. Oh, all right. So Next would be the Hyakasu.
Yeah, that's the tease. Somebody who is always sort of poking at characters in an anime. Somebody who is maybe saying things that are very suggestive, not necessarily flirty, but just like really kind of pushing your buttons, which is actually the talent that they had. There's Yuko Kano from Dust Maidens of Amnesia. Asi Nagatora from Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro. They're flirty, but at the same time, they are, kind of messing with you. It's worth noting here especially with the Hyakasu, there's a subset of some of these archetypes. It's called the dare type, which is Hyakasu dare would be the name here. These are romantic versions of these archetypes. The term dare in Japanese is onomatopoeia for lovey-dovey, and so if you see an archetype that has a dare at the end, that's a character whose personality is geared towards romance. Mm-hmm. And because it's such a huge part of the genre, a lot of these archetypes include that as part of their name and the way they run. And if you're in a campaign where people are comfortable playing that sort of thing, you can swap out the archetype for the dare type, and that will actually modify your attributes. One of the values that that characters have is passion, which is enthusiasm and kind of an exuberance of expression. The dare type actually swaps that out with love. And so there, it's like your motivation is looking for love, doing things to help the people you love. You're motivated by either the search for love or the defense of love or something like that. So that becomes an important value to you as a character. In some campaigns, that kind of thing would be would probably be pretty popular.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, the next one on the list is the Kaiju Taku.
Yeah. I created a portmanteau of Kaiju Otaku, and that was the idea that just again taking all giant monster movies as having happened. People would just be starving for information, and a culture, Japanese culture is particularly keen on, what we would call like zines, and of course they're greatly into photography. So the idea of these young, sort of like obsessed people desperately trying to find all the information they can about kaiju in a world where, just as part of the setting, the governments try and hide as much as they can about kaiju. It just seemed a natural for me. Our iconic character for the Kaiju Taku is actually kind of inspired by Jacques Cousteau. For each of these archetypes, there's a character that represents that archetype and tells you something about the world. So the character connected with the Kaiju Taku is Sonia Papadopoulos, who is a marine biologist from Cyprus, who is like kind of the leading authority on kaiju biology. This, by the way, was a creation of my wife in our online campaign. Since all of this is kind of a big plug, I might as well mention the fact here that I have a Patreon. And a lot of pretty much this entire book has been funded by my patrons, and they've been amazing. And the kind of at the top of the heap there are my aces, which is a group of role players that have spent the past 2 years meeting every other week, playing a long-running Mecha versus Kaiju campaign, and of course trying out new rules and building new mecha and things like that. My wife is one of the members, and she created the character of Sonia Papadopoulos, who's kind of is a genius biologist. So that also helped us to kind of build out the Mediterranean area, because there's areas of the map. I've been writing MVK for like over 10 years, but there's parts of the map that I just kind of never got around to, and Mediterranean was one of them. So she had some great ideas with that, and so I used that. But yeah, as far as inspiration for the Kaiju Taku, yeah, I'd have to go with Jacques Cousteau, because he was just like fascinated by it, and just would go wherever he needed to go to find the next big thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, the next one on the list would be the Kuru, which nice little bit of onomatopoeia with that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the wonderful thing about these archetypes, is that like Kuru, cool, it's the cool guy, and I mean, so many to count there, but I mean, like for me, like the coolest of the cool has always been Char from Mobile Suit Gundam. I mean, regardless of when he shows up and what guise and what personality he's putting on, he is always just like, you never see him sweat. I mean, it's you'll see him mad, but he always has this like sort of core of coolness to him, and especially when compared to Amora Ray, or really any of the other people he ends up fighting, they're always sort of either moody and depressed, or wild and over the top, and he is just always just like ice cold.
There's a reason why so many people have been revisiting that concept for the past 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, it works.
Yeah. Plus there's the enduring meme of "I came here to laugh at you," which, as funny as that meme is, I feel like the bigger context has been kind of ignored with that. That whole scene in Zeta Gundam was him going, "Wait, this moody ass kid is the one who was frustrating me throughout the war."
Yeah, and that was funny, and I've actually had my own share of memes about Amuro with usually involving Bright Noah slapping him again.
Somebody had sent that slap to the song "Mr. Brightside" from The Killers.
Oh my god, I gotta track that down. That sounds gold. Yeah, that so the like on the complete flip side of that is Char, right? Because I mean, as much as he might be sort of nonplussed by it's still, anytime he's talking with people, especially when he shows up in Zeta Gundam, it's just like, he is just the coolest of the cool, and people people look up to him and are so are so impressed.
Mm-hmm. But continuing on from that, there is the Miko, which I feel like picking a Miko representative is kind of cheating because it's so blatantly obvious.
Well, I mean, one thing I like is Ray Hino from Sailor Mars from Sailor Moon.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, anytime these characters show up, I mean, they are like very. I mean, they're an obvious type, in part because of like the way they dress. I mean, they have a ceremonial uniform that they wear, which which kind of marks them out and makes them very very obvious. But at the same time, the idea of incorporating Shinto into anime stories are just really there's something, and I gotta get in a little bit into some kind of esoteric areas here, but Shinto really simply is just kind of a worship of nature spirits, and it's the idea that any important place in the world has a spirit. And so, like, if you look at, like, I don't know, a waterfall or a forest, and for a moment you feel that sort of sense of awe, you're feeling the presence of a kami, which is the spirit of the place. And Shinto is dedicated to these kami spirits, and their temples are dedicated to different kami, you propitiate to the kami, and then you'll get good fortune or positive vibes or whatever. I mean, it's just like any just like any religion. It's just like, if you perform the ceremonies, you get the benefit. If you do it honestly and end with faith. But Shinto is different from a lot of other religions because it is perfectly happy to exist alongside pretty much any other religion, because it doesn't worry so much about the afterlife. It focuses on the here and now. So, you could be, and many people have been, both a Buddhist and a practitioner of Shinto. Yeah. So, and it's that idea of like being a practitioner of it. You do these things because these spirits exist, and then and then things happen because of that. And it's just like, it's almost like magical science. And when you think of it from that point of view, it fits in perfectly with so many anime series. And because it lives comfortably with so many other faiths, you're not really being it's not a sin to include these sort of things in stories. It was really the first Asian religion that I really got deeply into, and the mythology of Shinto is sort of like woven into the Mecha versus Kaiju world in a lot of ways. You could play this game just as a straight science fiction giant monster, giant robot game. But if you like having some magical elements like so many anime do, there is a whole other layer of the world that that's happening adjacent to all the science fiction elements. And the Miko is kind of a way of characters accessing that. Abiko is a shrine maiden. They're the teenage girls usually that are working and tending shrines. They clean, they help people when they are performing prayers or ceremonies, usually dressed in red and white. And in Mecha vs. Kaiju, they also have the ability to communicate with the kami. And so that involves a lot of not just like sort of the mechanical things, but also the world of magic and bringing in supernatural elements into the game.
Mm-hmm. I can get that, but when it comes to now, one of the things that I was a bit curious about is in this shifting between the 5e skeleton and the 5th engine, were there certain things that you wanted to carry in from say 5e into the 5th engine, but for one reason or another just wasn't going to be compatible, or had to be completely blown up and started fresh?
It's funny. There really wasn't a whole lot, and in part because the purpose of the fifth engine was to make a narrative role-playing game sort of functionality over 5e, so that any 5th edition content could be brought into the game fairly easily, and all of the rules for creating giant monsters and giant robots would be usable in a 5th edition game. So by concentrating just on the core mechanics of, like, how do the dice work, what are the bonuses, it really made everything else pretty easy to port over. When you look at for example, when you look at the rules for bringing 5th edition content into Mecha versus Kaiju, a lot of the more complicated stuff would be like the mechanical bonuses. It's like special abilities, like a monster has a special ability, it breathes fire or whatever. But so many of those things, when brought into 5th edition, are just kind of narrative flourishes. Like, there's no inherent bonus to somebody breathing fire on you versus shooting you with a gun. If the die, if the die type for both of those attacks is D8, then the fire and the gun are basically doing the same thing. Unless you want to add in some perks and make it so that the fire has an extra effect, and the gun might have a different extra effect. So maybe the fire breath puts a condition on you that you are on fire, and that condition is equal to 1/2 the impact of the amount of stress that you caused. That's just one perk out of the dozens that we have in the book, versus like a lot of people, they'll give guns the advantage of just like they'll penetrate armor. So your firearm could have the special ability that if somebody is using armor, add a d6 to this attack. So it just that represents its armor penetrating ability. So I didn't really need to leave anything behind, because the system is designed to allow you to very easily create bonuses that mimic those effects. Anything that doesn't involve dice, you could break down to, like, for example, a narrative advantage. The fire breath could have a narrative advantage of things that can be lit on fire get lit on fire. That's straight from the player's handbook for Fireball, right? Things things that are combustible, will catch fire. That's just a narrative bonus in MVK.
Mm-hmm.
So anything, any of those abilities can be ported over very easily. And in fact, the rules for, like, if you have a monster that is a spellcaster, and, like, a lot of 5th edition monster stat blocks have just like sets of spells. Here are the spells that they can cast. You can use that whole stat block in MVK, and for the spell list, those are just aspects of the thing. So if they have spell casting, they spend a point of inspiration, because we use the inspiration mechanic as sort of like a plot point. It's sort of a plot point option from the DMG. So the game maker spends a point of inspiration. That monster gets access to its spell list, and all of those can be treated as aspects. So you just look at it. Here's the name. What's the name of the spell? Okay, you cast that, and you can, as a GM, you can just say it has this effect. As a web spell, okay, you are now immobilized. And that will then you have to deal with that condition. So the system, so the system's simple enough to really be able to mimic any of the 5e abilities that would otherwise take up pages and pages of rules.
Now, given that there's plenty of art within the pages that are depicting various styles of mecha. Some of them are a little bit more on the tanks with legs in that blocky sense. Some of them are more akin to the power armor like approach of Go Nagai's work, and Ishikawa's work as well. I don't want to leave him out. But there's one particular gimmick that has been a staple with mecha throughout the years, and I'm curious how this one might be integrated within the fifth engine through Mecha vs. Kaiju, and that is transforming mechs. There's been some form of transforming or combination approaches throughout the last 50 years when it comes to mecha, and it's one of those things that somebody's going to inevitably bring up of either the jet that goes into mech or something like that. There's been whole franchises built around those transforming gimmicks. So how would you handle it without it getting too in the weeds?
It's just one of the special abilities of mecha. For building your mecha, we use construction points, and a construction point represents one combination of a perk and a drawback, and that can be, we have a whole list of sort of like classic abilities, what we call powers, talents, and tools, and that's just sort of an overarching section. For you combine a power, you combine a perk, you combine a drawback, and then you can have a power like armor or multi-attack or flight, and it just has one ability with some kind of drawback. And then for when you're building a mecha, you can give each of your mecha systems one of these advantages, and it just costs one construction point. Typically, like starting level characters will start with like 4 construction points. There are 4 systems for the mecha, so that's enough points to give people like 1 special ability per mecha system, and that makes it simple. Transforming is would just be a mecha ability, and what allows you to do is to create a secondary form for your mecha that uses the same amount of construction points, but it has this this second form. And in fact, one of our players in our Ace game created a mecha that was basically built off of the corpse of a kaiju, and they just they put armor around it so that it looks like a giant robot, But really, it's got this like sort of reanimated body of a kaiju on the inside that has a tendency to mutate into different forms. So that's just a transformer, but it's got a different origin, and a different backstory. But all it does is it just like at some point, you can spend a point of inspiration and activate this alternate form. So that cost works in the context of the campaign because it's the only one that can do that. But if you were doing a Transformers campaign, like for example, using Transformers 1, which, oh my God, is like one of the best Transformers movies I've ever seen. And everybody should go out and watch it this week because box office rules being what they are, if we want to see more of that, we got to get the numbers up. I might even see it again this week just to do my bit. But if you're in a game where everybody transforms, then then there's no cost to that. It's just like you're just switching back and forth between vehicle mode and mecha mode at will, and sort of as a campaign trope. One of the things would obviously be like one form is better at fighting, one form is better at moving. Yeah. That's really the only sort of rule connected to to that particular kind of mecha. Other than that, sky's the limit.
So, given that, I'd like to put that into practice. If somebody wanted to build something akin to the VF1 Valkyrie, how would they end up doing that within that system?
Let's see how we can do that as a starting character. There are no levels in MBK because you're free to spend your XP however you want. But if you wanted an ace pilot, you're going to start with 4 construction points, which obviously is going to be limiting. But you're going to play around with that. So I can actually use one of our iconic characters as kind of a model for that. In the lore of Mecha vs. Kaiju, the greatest defenders of Japan are Task Force Ichiban. They're the #1 pilots. They're always there to defend Japan, and one of them is named Ace Kasaragi, and he flies a mecha that is called the Iron Angel, and so obviously you need flight. There are 4 systems for a mecha. There's the aux, which stands for auxiliary. Power, which is like how much juice the mecha puts out. Structure is how strong and how much damage it can take. And weapons are for any time you want to try and attack something. So for starters, if you want to create a Valkyrie, first off, it needs to fly. So that's going to be under power. Power represents all of the flight systems related to the mecha. Mm-hmm. It's going to need a gun. At the starting level, you don't have a missile swarm yet. You got to work up to that. So so you would just have the kind of autocannon rifle that the Valkyrie typically uses.
The good old gun pod.
The good old gun pod, yeah. And the for structure, and then you get that question of where is the transforming element? You got to put it in someplace, and it would really depend on the desires of the player. It could very easily fit either in auxiliary or in structure, because it's narratively appropriate for both. Structure is the kind of superstructure of the mecha. That's where the term comes from. So obviously, putting your transforming ability in there would be appropriate. Also, they. Let's be honest. The Valkyries are not the sturdiest things, at least not when they first start off. So not having any sort of armor system would be kind of appropriate. And then that would leave the auxiliary system for the mecha, which you could use for communications, sensors, any other additional non-combat system you wanted to add to it. Alternately, you could put the transforming system into auxiliary, since especially early on, the Valkyries are pretty straightforward combat machines. So putting the transforming element under auxiliary, and then giving them some kind of defensive capability would under structure, that would probably be the way you build it. And then as a since all of the mecha in that campaign have this transforming ability, at least the ones that usually show up and on the front of the cameras, and I'm giving a shout out to my brothers in the Destroids, my one of my personally favorites. There probably wouldn't be a cost for that transforming element, because they do it all the time, and you want it to be cool. And there and then when it transforms, you would have a choice as a player. If you wanted it to be able to transform again, the new form would need to have the transforming perk, the transforming ability. So that would leave you 3 other systems that you could work in. So that would be probably have the same weapon system, because it's still the same gun pod. So power and structure could have new abilities connected to it. And there you want to look at the mecha and what is the advantage of, for example, the Battloid? There you're able to fight the Zentradi strength to strength. So there you probably want to lower the power system, because flight isn't important, and boost your structure. So you're transforming because this particular mode is physically stronger and is better able to hold up in a fight.
That, and be able to do more precise targeting with that gun pod, because you've got it stable.
Right, and you can represent that by you can play around with the dice, right? So the dice numbers stay the same, but you can switch where they go. So maybe the fighter has a power of D8 and a weapon system of D6. You could swap those in the Battloid mode, because the weapon is more stable, and then you could also switch your aux and your structures so that it can take more damage in this particular mode. Honestly, I have no and then with for example the Gurlock mode, Guardian, what they call in Robotech, that's always sort of that's usually used for when they're trying to do something non-combat, right? They're exploring, or they're recovering, or they need the mobility of the jet, but they want to have the functionality of the mecha. There, you might shift your dice so that power and auxiliary are your major things. And then anytime you're taking an action, first you narrate what you want to do, and then you call out your traits. And you are choosing which of the traits from your drives, which is your motivation, your style, which is how you do things, and your values, which is what's important to you. You pick one from each of those things, and then if you're in a mecha, you pick one of your systems. And you add all those dice together, and you roll them together in a dice pool. So, if you're in the Guardian mode, and let's say you are you're moving over slowly in an area, and you're like, you're sifting through the rubble. You're looking for survivors or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you could call out your auxiliary trait and roll that. And alternately, if you're trying to, I don't know, let's say, lift something off the survivors, there you could call out your structure. And in that case, you'd probably want to transform into Battleoid mode, so you're stronger. So there's a tactical side to things where you're choosing which of your systems is going to be better, but all of it is there to serve the story. And that's why you tell your story first, and then you roll the dice to see how well you're able to succeed at that action you're trying.
Mm-hmm. That certainly makes sense. Now, with that in mind, what are you shooting for as far as a release window for the book?
This is my opportunity to be honest with people, and also to talk a little bit about how Kickstarters function. So we as you mentioned before, we had a successful Kickstarter for Zine Quest in February, and we launched Shen Battler Aurora, which was the first 5th edition game, and as you mentioned, it was it's actually going to be out on drive-through very soon. I'm thinking October. We have a good friend of mine just did a complete reworking of the layout, and it is so much better than the version I did myself because I'm not a layout artist. And so that's going to be available for purchase very soon. Mecha versus Kaiju, we did a Kickstarter summer of 2023. Set a goal for 6,000 and got 5,000, which is good. I mean, I obviously I was hoping to fund, but having people willing to pay $5,000 for this little book is it's very heartening. But I did this new edition because I wanted to, and I hate to use the sort of trite terminology, but I wanted to take the game up to the next level. Mecha vs. Kaiju since 2014 has been a game system for Fate Core, and have a lot of people that played that. I've people all over the world that played the system, and we've got over a dozen supplements for it. It was a lot of fun doing it, but I wanted to have a system that would have a greater penetration into the market, right? I mean, for lack of a better term, I want more people playing the game. So that was why I wanted to do a new edition. To get a broader audience, I've actually partnered up with LaunchBoom, which is a group that helps people crowdfunding to set up their marketing campaign. And they literally have they use an online school sort of backbone for their website, and they have lessons that teach you how do you plan your marketing, how do you figure out who's your core audience, how do you do your ad campaign and your photos and all of this stuff, and they will literally teach you lessons on how to do this sort of thing, which is basically what I needed. So I've been putting together all of that over the summer. I've just about got all of our images done. So we're going to start our ad campaign in October, and shooting for a spring release for our crowdfund. Basically, 1 year after our Shen Battler success, releasing the full Mecha vs. Kaiju core book. With a goal of for people who are anybody who wants to ever do a crowdfunding, the key is to fund on the first day. So when anybody comes through over the rest of the campaign, it's already funded, and they're like, oh, this book is actually going to be published, so I'm going to back it. The other advantage was that I I completed the actual layout. So the PDF that I sent you is what people will receive the day the campaign funds come in. Mm-hmm. So as soon as the whole thing funds and and everybody's credit card has been charged, that day everybody's going to get a 140-page PDF of the core book, and then any of the stretch goals that are unlocked, those will be added in in the weeks that follow. I've got a really great layout guy called Nathan Paletta, who you can find on DriveThruRPG. He's got his his examples, the stuff that he's done, his rates. He's done like a dozen books, and his layout is really solid. So anybody looking to do their own book, I highly recommend Nathan, because he's great. And did a lot of this stuff. You did a ton of stuff. Without charging an arm and a leg. And so the book is, and it will go through and we'll do all the stretch goals when the actual campaign is completed. But there's a core book, 140-page core book that people will get the moment the thing funds, and then any stretch goals will be added in later. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I got from Launch Room, one of the reasons I went with them is they have they've got an angle with the advertising, and specifically with setting up a mailing list, because you need emails to contact people, and when you give me your email address, if you go to info.mechaversuskaiju.com and you share your email address, then you'll be on our mailing list. I send out updates every month, not just about the game, but also about just kaiju and mecha related news, because I love it. I love sharing stuff like that. But there's also an option for becoming one of our VIP members, and this is this is something I add in for I call it our VIP or BIPU. Mm-hmm. In Japan, in their classic sort of Hancho style, they just take VIP. They take those letters, they look at it. Oh, that's and they pronounce it BIPU. So if you become a BIPU backer, you can place a $1 fully refundable deposit, and when the campaign funds, you'll get a copy of our Mecha Assault Force Starter Campaign, which is the first adventure book that we're going to be releasing. It's a $10 value, but if you leave a $1 deposit, you'll get that free when the campaign funds. And that aspect right there was something that's specific to Launch Boom, and so it's it's a way of me kind of seeing who's really interested in the game, and kind of basing the funding on that, and and rewarding people who are willing to willing to put their trust in me, and are looking for for this kind of game.
Yeah, I can get that. With that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple once again and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Well, the faithful are so friendly here. How can I say no?
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Jump high!
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!